Welcome, everyone. I am your host, Iman, and today I'm feeling particularly grounded in that the end of the semester is finally here. My students have their projects and I am still grading them, but I already feel a deep sense of relief and a deep sense of deep breath that I know that the summer is going to bring, and I so desperately need it. But in addition to feeling a little burnt out, which we're going to be talking about today, I'm also feeling just so incredibly excited because we have our first guest of the show, Tahirah, who is just so many things. She is a self proclaimed thought daughter, she is a culture critic, a media critic, she is a scholar, a researcher. I first came across her and you when I was just on TikTok one day and I was like, oh my God, who is this beautiful Black Muslim woman who is giving me this breakdown of Islam and sinners? And I was like, from then on, I was like, that was my favorite movie of the year. This is so smart, so brilliant. And I've just been an admirer ever since. And I think that was like, I want to say I came across that at the end of 2025, or does that sound
Yeah,
about right?
I think it's been like it's crazy. It's been a year since Sinners came out. So yeah.
Yeah. So all that to say is, you do so much with New York City. You're a third generation New Yorker, right? You're from Brooklyn. You do so much with Mom Donnie, and I love everything that you do in terms of just like raising awareness. Feels like such a shallow word, but engaging with just the Muslim American community and all that is going on in this moment and all that we represent in this moment. So, and as well as just like you are a pop culture girly as well. So and a researcher, and you connect all these dots. So I just wanted to open by asking you, where are you finding grounding today, or where do you find grounding in general?
First of all, thank you so much. That was such an intro. Oh my gosh, me. um. Also, I'm very excited to be here. Where am I finding grounding? I'm echoing what you said about the semester being over. Yeah, definitely counting down to that. But also, you know that thing when you're like working on something, praying for something, and you finally are like seeing some of those fruits of your labor, like I think my life is really mimicking the seasons. And so this spring feels like a rebirth in my own personal life, which is really, really exciting because I feel like it was the longest winter ever. I mean, words to Sister Soldier, the coldest winter. It was a long winter. So I'm finding grounding in the fact that like winter is over, in all the metaphysical ways and in the physical ways. And I'm excited for like this next chapter of my life. Things are blossoming and that feels really, really scary, but also exciting.
And I'm so curious because I want to get to know you better. What kinds of things are the horizon? What can what's
Um,
blossoming? What's coming to an end?
okay. So I mentioned this a little bit before, but inshallah, by the time this is out, I will be, if not officially moved, I will sign a lease.
Oh my gosh,
Inshallah.
alhamdulillah,
I will
alhamdulillah,
sign a lease.
inshallah.
And I feel like that means a lot for me as a native New Yorker to find my own space here in the city. The city feels like it doesn't belong to us anymore. Crazy enough, as a like growing up here in New York, I never even imagined a future of me being able to still live here. But I knew I always wanted to come back to New York. So that would just be really affirming for, little Tahirah growing up running the streets. Like I'm back here in my city and it like feels like home, but I get to define home for myself. So that's really exciting. And also I think by the time this comes out, I'll probably already announce that I just kind of got this really cool fellowship program. I'm going to be working with the Doris Duke Foundation. So I'm super excited
Oh
about
my gosh,
that.
congratulations. That
Thank
is
you. I literally
huge.
just got the call yesterday. So like this is fresh.
Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to hear that. Oh, but what are you going to be
Yeah.
doing with them?
So this is their first ever creator fellowship, like ever, which is very crazy. Like I'm the first, and it's also just me. It's not even like a cohort. Like it's just little old me, and helping them like really translate a lot of the amazing work that they're doing to an audience, but also specifically like kind of demystifying the whole glam, foundational, cultural and artistic, institutional world to the average person because people don't know what people working in institutions, and also I'm sure you experience this with academia, no one knows what people actually are doing. You know what I mean? We have all of these very like grand titles, and there's like so many things moving and working along like behind the scenes, but what does that mean to the public who have this really strong distrust in institutions, especially ones that don't understand or speak the internet? like you lose so much of your audience, you lose so much of potential donors or supporters or people that want to join or be a part of your cause if you aren't meeting people where they're at. So I'm hoping to help them fill in those gaps, make things accessible, make things fun. I'm also really excited because I get to do a lot of like camera front work and like doing some street interviews with like different artists and things like that. So I'm very, very excited.
That is, oh my gosh, that's first off, you're going to be so perfect for that role and for that work. And something that I love so much about your work is that you do break down traditionally like the kinds of concepts that you would not normally see on the internet. But I
Yeah.
see you as a part of a generation and a cohort of people who are bringing really deep critical thinking, really deep cultural analysis, really deep political analysis into, internet speak, as you just said, and
Yeah.
in a way that is also like fun and engaging and it clearly shows so much, that you're very on the ground and very able to speak to
Boots
like
on
a
the
broad
ground.
boots on
Yeah.
the ground, exactly.
I'm in these
Able to
internet streets.
you
Yeah.
absolutely and really, and bringing such like a deep and necessary conversation. And that is something that like I find that's like one of the reasons why I wanted to start this podcast, because I also find that people are like, well, what do you do in a classroom? What is religious studies? What is Black studies?
Yeah.
And I wanted to create a space in which you don't have to spend $50,000 a year to know what we are doing in these spaces. Also, maybe you also don't have to do the reading. Like, what about we get in spaces where like professors like profess and teach and like give you the too long
Yeah.
didn't read, so that, everyone is equipped, because it's a leisure, it's a privilege to be able to read and engage
Correct.
in these ways. But that doesn't mean that that knowledge should only stay in those spaces.
Yeah.
So I find it so exciting that you're going to be showing this art world, kind of institution world of what it's like, and bringing that to the sphere. I'm just so curious, why and how did you start doing this kind of work? What is it grounded in?
Okay, so I have a very interesting creator influencer journey. I started during COVID, like a lot of people. I mean, I've always been a very artsy girl. Not even just like outfits and makeup and all
Because the
those
outfits be
things.
outfitting and the makeup be
Thank you.
makeuping. Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you. You
Yes,
see
yes.
it.
I
So,
see
but
you.
what's like I grew up in an artsy family. I grew up in performing arts. Like I danced at Alvin Ailey when I was younger. I went to high schools in a singing program, was like playing piano, guitar. So like I've always been a very artsy, creative person. COVID hit. What else does a girl do? Does an artist do but create? So I was doing that and then kind of ended up doing this full time. I took a break from school. Another part of my lore, I was doing pre-law for my first 2 years of school. Since I was a kid, I saw myself as a lawyer. And COVID had a really interesting way of like literally and figuratively sitting me on my ass and being like, what is your plans for your life? Really, where do you see yourself? And I realized I didn't want to, I couldn't commit to law in a way that felt ethical and true to myself. And so, yeah, I was just doing a lot of creative work. I was working at BuzzFeed for a little bit. I did some modeling campaigns. Like I was a part of Alicia Keys' campaign launch for her skincare brand. A lot of fun, artsy stuff. I did some videos with Cash App, some commercials, a lot of stuff. And then I decided after like traveling around the world for a bit, I lived in Colombia. I lived in Europe for a little bit. I came back to New York and I was like, I want to finish my degree. And in the most like respectful way possible, I just felt like I was too smart to not have a degree. Like I met a lot of
Absolutely.
people and I was, you went where? You graduate? I said, okay, yeah. So I already did 2 years. Let me just finish school. But it was imperative for me to choose something to study that wasn't based off of just how can I make money, but based off of something that I truly felt like I wanted to learn and also that I wanted to make a part of my life in a way that what could fill in something like the spot in my life that was missing that law I felt like couldn't give to me. And so Africana studies and media kind of became the perfect space for me to talk about these things. I've always been a media girly. Like the way that I watch movies and read books and listen to music, you would have to watch me. Like the way that I put myself into the body of the main character. Like I'm that person. I can't shut up in the movie theaters. I'm listening to albums front, back, side. I'm reading books and I'm reading the forward and the backward. So I've always like digested media, but it wasn't something I was talking about online. I felt like nobody cared about it. For the most part, no one wanted to hear I should say we as a society don't really leave space for hijabi women and for Black women to talk about things that are outside of beauty and lifestyle. Like I felt that very heavily, especially being a hijabi. The girls are really only talking about like, you know, the matcha lattes and the getting married and the abayas and the vela. And like beauty is important, especially for hijabis, for Muslim women. Beauty capital is real. That changes our material conditions 100%. Sure. But then it gets to a point where it's like, are these the only spaces we're allowed to be present? You know, like no one wants to hear what you have to say, but they want to see you put on this outfit. They want to see you do your makeup, but they don't want to talk about the complexities of said hijab. But everybody's making videos talking about, oh, hijabis have the best makeup, the best skincare. So I was feeling a little bit of that for like my first year back in school of doing the content because that's what everyone else was doing. And because I do still love a look, I'm a look queen, love a look, but I'm not feeling fulfilled. And then I randomly made a video about Bad Bunny and his album, Debí Tirar Foto, and the book Babel by R.F. Kuang. And I was talking about the ways that when I was reading the book, which I don't know if you're familiar with R.F. Kuang and Babel, I absolutely love that book. She's a scholar and academic as well as a writer, and she infuses a lot of critiques of like colonialism in her fantasy world. And Babel, it takes place in London during colonial times, and it is all of these students from different parts of the world that are being actively colonized, and they are helping essentially the British translate their documents, their whatever things that the secrets of their countries that they're holding. They're part of this group of people that are translating that. Anyway, I realized it was interesting that when I was seeing these students in this book talk about translating their indigenous languages to Western languages and assisting with colonialism in a really messed up way, that when we think about language, when we think about performance, when we're thinking about art, I noticed that, like, for example, with Debí Tirar Foto, Bad Bunny is Puerto Rican. People are always talking about Puerto Ricans and Caribbean Spanish-speaking people don't speak proper Spanish, whatever that means. And I was like, oh, that sounds like when I hear people talk about Black Americans, that we don't speak proper English, but people are always consuming our media. Everyone in the world, especially in the Spanish-speaking world, was listening to Bad Bunny's album while simultaneously critiquing how he is speaking. And I made a video like, did you guys notice that people that come from marginalized communities that are closer connected to Blackness are always not only at the top of the entertainment industry in their respective countries, but always have to defend their language and linguistics? Very random. Was I tying these connections from? I don't know. And why did I make that video? Have no idea what prompted me to make a super nerdy video. It's something that I just kept to myself. Like those were thoughts that I had in my head. Oh, how are these two pieces of media like contributing and communicating with each other? And I posted the video, and it was one of my first videos in a few months that hit over 10K views, which really isn't a lot in the grand scheme of like the beauty and lifestyle space, but having like 20, 30, 40,000 views across like Instagram and TikTok of people talking about language and coloniality and relating that to a book and Bad Bunny. And like one of the comments I got was like, how did your brain tie these things together? And then I was, oh, let me explain to my audience how my brain works. Thus, all of this came about. And it was also what I've been studying in school. Like I'm in school every day talking about, I'm an Africana studies major for the girls that didn't know. And I'm always like unpacking these things and talking about like history and culture specifically. And it just felt like I was living kind of this dissonance of online and IRL, what I was doing in my real life. And that one video was the one time I kind of allowed these things to merge. And people were interested. I realized that people had a capacity, I would say like a hunger for the information that is accessible, but also rooted in something. There's a lot of disinformation and misinformation online. Really, anyone can pick up a camera and say anything, and more likely than not, people are going to take it at face value, even if it's not true, even if it's not rooted in anything. And I felt like I had a good opportunity to not only share, similar to what you said, like sharing what I'm experiencing and learning in the classroom with people that don't have that access, but also from a framework that felt familiar to a lot of people, the framework that I wished I was experiencing more, I guess a framework that I'm like cultivating and creating in real time. So it's, even though I've been doing this for 5 years, it's only really been within the last year that I feel like I found my flow And I'm still incorporating like looks and fashion and makeup and all these things in my content, but in a way that doesn't feel empty. It feels super weird and quirky and interesting and artistic and intellectual, and like it feels like me in a way that like I couldn't have imagined it coming. Like I was last year, I was in a drought. I don't know what I was doing. I was like, girl, I even wrote like a Substack article. Like, what am I doing on Instagram? I don't know. I don't know. And that one little video, I was like, oh, you guys actually don't. You actually care more about me and like my thoughts more than just like what I look like. It's more than like, oh, she's a pretty girl on the internet. Like you want to hear my thoughts? Got it. So I'm sorry, I was super long winded, but
That was so motivating, so amazing. You recently wrote this piece on Substack called A Dying Star. And I also just want to uplift a very star quality in your own description of yourself and your own becoming that you just, beautifully narrated for us. And you talked about how you constantly returned to this voice in you that said, I want to do something that's not the law, but that feels more speaking to who I am. I want to be able to have an understanding of my success and my creativity beyond just like a capitalist metric. And that is some real star quality ish. You know what I mean? And that is something that is a cultivation of a kind of sense of things, a kind of intuition that people spend a lifetime cultivating. I would love to know what it meant to hear that voice, to be able to differentiate that sense of things from the kind of normative things that people tell us, make lots of money, go to law school, be successful in this way. Like if you had to give people advice on what it means to follow your intuition so that they can feel like what they're doing is fulfilling their purpose in the same way that it's very clear that you feel like you are fulfilling your purpose because you are a star. You mentioned in this piece, you knew that you were born to be a star. You've known this, right? And so can you just give us some advice on what it means to cultivate that inner voice, to hear it and to move accordingly?
I am still trying to get familiar with her. I feel like I've been a person, like I said in that piece, from at like childhood. I knew I was special, I was important. I felt all these things very intrinsically. If you ask like my mother one a memory of me as a child, it was like me coming back home from school. And I was like, Mom, none of the girls want to play with me. And she's like, why? I was like, I sang them this song that I wrote and they didn't like it. This is also how I found out I could sing, by the way. She was okay, well, sing me the song. And the song is I'm better than you. And my mother's like, okay, well maybe the reason why there's a way we can take the confidence and make it, you know. So that's me as like a child in like my purest, rawest form of like, oh, I'm that girl. But life has a way of humbling little black girls in a very, very, very like destructive and deeply impactful way. And so for me, I'm very blessed that I had that as like my starting point because everything I do now is getting back to that. Who was I? And I would like say to the audience, who were you without all of the structural and communal things put onto you that are supposed to be self-defining? Like you are a woman, so you do this. You are Muslim, so you like this. You are black, so you act like this. Who were you at your core without all of the external influences? And what did that person like? What were they seeking for? How did they feel about themselves? That is like I everything I do is for like little Tahirah. I feel like she had it she had it right, you know? And so I am constantly just trying to get back to her. But also when I think about intuition, I think the hardest thing and the hardest thing that I do daily is try to be myself. I think people talk about being yourself as this easy thing. It's so natural, but like I just described for a lot of us, where life takes us on this journey, and a lot of these systems have a really deep way of like shaking us and detaching us from who we are, from indigeneity in a bigger sense than just like culturally, but also like physically within your body. Who are you when you're not performing? When you're not just filling in these roles that you're told to fill in? And so that's a practice. Like something as little as if you're at a restaurant and you ordered something and they sent you something else, girl, send that back. You didn't ask for that. You know what I mean? Or, if you're at a cafe and it's, oh, do you want Maybe you're somebody who's like on a diet, right? And you're like, oh, I shouldn't have this matcha latte with like extra syrup or something. But girl, matcha tastes like grass without the syrup. Like, get the syrup with the matcha because that's what you really like. So it's like these little practices every day of choosing yourself. I think more often than not, advice that I've heard that helps is like your first thought is usually your truest thought. Not necessarily always the right one, whatever right is, or it doesn't even necessarily have to be the thought or that turns into an action. But even just like acknowledging that you had that or that you felt that way or that you like, you're something happened maybe in your life and your first response that you were angry. Even if you don't act out of anger, you should still assess the fact that that made you angry. What does that mean to you? What does that signify that your first impulse was like, that rubbed me the wrong way? So that's something I really, really, really am trying to constantly in practice figure out, what do I actually feel about this thing? What are those initial instincts? And a big thing I think that a lot of Black women struggle with is like disembodiment. I feel like I'm super in my head. Like, I feel like I live so much of my life in my head, in my thoughts, which isn't necessarily always a bad thing. Also, I do have ADHD as a woman, so that's, but this sense of like disembodiment can be very frustrating. I think, especially on top of being Black, being a woman, but also being Muslim. I think there's so much knowing in the physical, in your body telling you things, right? And like as Muslims, we're taught that like the heart is another way of knowing and interpreting knowledge, right? We're taught that like you have your fitrah, which is like naturally aligned with Allah. People are always talking about the nafs, but there's also that part of you that Allah placed in you that is trying to always get back to that oneness. And so, I don't believe, and we as Muslims, I don't think should believe that we're born in sin. So then it's okay. There's something intrinsically good in you. Who is that? Where is that? How do you get back to that? I think that's a lifelong journey. But like I said, I think those little practices every day, they really do help. Like saying no more often, feeling like if you're a little tired, like, girl, take a nap. Like all of these things that sound super simple, they build up that muscle of I can trust myself with myself. And I think that's the number one way that like I try to walk around with confidence. And a lot of it is very real, but some of it is also a part of a shield for me. I talked about in that article that I think it's unsafe for Black women to walk around as being visibly insecure. Unfortunately, it's something that I think it makes you a target. I think you definitely need spaces to let those walls down, but you cannot walk around as if I'm better than you. You have to have that. You know what I mean? And if you're a Black woman, you probably are. I don't know. I don't make the rules. You probably are. You probably got it. You're actually probably outperforming everyone around you, Pookie.
Period. Tell me when you've been in a room and you've never thought, how the hell did I? How are we all in the same space right now?
I'm meeting people. I'm like, you graduated from what top 10 university? Oh, girl, I said, let me go back to school tonight. If you could do it, I damn sure could do it.
Right. And that's because so much more is expected of us.
Yeah.
In order to have access to the same spaces.
Yeah.
And, I love that. I love what you talked about in terms of there can be a really big call to be disembodied, right? And you talked about the fitra in Islam, your kind of innate goodness, your innate oneness with the divine, with creation. And I also like to think about this as like Marifa, like knowledge of the heart, right?
Yes.
This also being an important part. I get a lot of, as a scholar of religion, both in my classrooms and then when I get on the internet and I talk about things, something that I frequently try to tell my students is that religion does not equal just texts. Religion does not equal just belief. In order to be able to understand what religion looks like in the world, you have to be able to look at what people do. You have to be able to understand contradiction. You have to be able to understand that it is what people make meaning out of the text. It is how people transform the tradition by being in discussion with it. That is how I think as a scholar of religion, but I also find for myself, right, there's also fundamental parts of the Islamic theological and philosophical tradition that also echo that kind of intellectualism, that kind of embodied knowledge, right? Like a huge part of Black feminist and womanist thought is a deep attunement with one's embodied knowledge.
Yes.
That they have both embodied knowledge, but also embodied knowledge becomes, it's like what forms after the technology, after you experience lived experience, right?
Yes.
Embodied knowledge is like a form of wisdom. You talked about that you have to have this kind of confidence. And for me, in my own experience, that confidence has only soared when I have prioritized my embodied and lived experience. Nothing
Yes.
else feels like a fit, like nothing else feels like a better, like truly like a better fit onto myself and who I am, that feels more comfortable than leading with my sense of things, with leading with my own intellect, my own knowledge, right? That's always in conversation with other things, but in order for it to feel, coherent with my soul, my spirit, with who I am, I have to have that sense of things.
Yeah.
And something that I loved, when we're talking about putting this embodied knowledge forward, having that be a part of your confidence, this being essential to knowing like your own intuition, even if you just want to send something back. Something that, that really struck with me that you said is that the world also has a way of like knocking down little Black girls. And the world has a way of like knocking down Black women again and again and again, and so many different discourses. I just did an episode on start with yourself, and like this kind of,
Yeah.
bootstrap narrative that's peddled onto Black women who work harder than everyone, or who earn the least but get fired
Correct.
the most, as if things
Correct.
just start with yourself. Another kind of knockdown that I've been seeing recently, and I think this is something that's a little bit more insidious in terms of people aligning with far right discourses and
Mm-hmm.
making that seem like theology without them even knowing. So, what I mean by that, for example, is that if you talk about a Black Muslim experience, a Black queer experience, a Black Muslim and queer experience, people will critique you as not speaking from a place of the tradition or your own engagement with the tradition, but will talk down on you by saying you're just talking about identity politics.
Yes.
That and I've noticed that this has become a rhetoric where people will, say that you are not speaking from a space of spirituality, a space from religion,
Mm-hmm.
a space of intellect. You're just like pandering to identity politics. And it's always used as a means of dismissing, I find in particular, Black women and Black Muslim women's embodied knowledge about the tradition, embodied knowledge about their lives, who they are, this world, and the powers that be. And so I'm just curious. This is something that I've been grappling with myself in terms of
Mm.
people critiquing me for speaking from a place of identity politics, which actually has me thinking, oh, I need to do an episode on actually what identity politics is, because the Combahee River Collective and Barbara Smith are fed up, with how people are misusing that word, because that word was a synonym almost for embodied knowledge, from
Mm-hmm.
knowledge from the heart, the kind of wisdom that one gets from studying something and from experience. So I'm just curious, you draw these connections between race, class, gender. Have you ever like encountered people telling you, oh, you're just speaking from a place of identity politics, or trying to de-intellectualize you by reducing what you're doing to identity politics?
Yes. I think for me, it's super frustrating because on one end, in like certain academic and even in sometimes, like leftist spaces, there is this questioning of me because of the fact that, specifically, I would say because I wear hijab, as almost as like, oh, she's still a little brainwashed. You know what I mean? She's not as woke as she can be. This idea that because I can know as much as I know, and I'm still practicing a religion, that there's a disconnect between what I'm saying and the truth of it, and my ability, how I came to that conclusion, or even the belief that those two things have to be separate, is like very interesting. But then also, like, on the Muslim front, there is a constant de-intellectualizing and a constant performance, and I feel like so many Black Muslims have to do. And when you were speaking, I just couldn't stop thinking about those videos of usually like Arab men going to countries, and some of them happen in the West, but going to African countries and like asking a random Black guy to recite and being surprised that he can recite well, as if Africa isn't the only Muslim majority continent on the planet. Why would it be odd? Or like I'll say something talking about Islam, Perfect example, I make, my videos, my Black Muslim series, my Black Muslim historical figure series I'm doing right now. And someone is like, oh, do you know about Bilal? What indicated that I didn't know about Bilal?
Have you
Explain to
seen
me.
have you seen the black Muslim bingo card? And it's like in the center is like the number one most thing is like blah. It's like
Yeah.
please.
So constantly having to defend my Islamic knowledge and then also my quote unquote like secular knowledge about the world is very frustrating. It's something that I don't think other people really experience. I think it's a very intersectional experience. But when we're talking about like identity politics, one of my videos about like a potential like dissertation themes, I want to talk about how I believe that African American Muslims speak their own dialects of Arabic. And one of the comments I got on like YouTube Shorts was, well, Black Muslims need to just speak proper Arabic.
Mm-hmm.
You're not special, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
like another like theme I hear is you'll see Black Muslims, which feels very performative to me, say things like, "Oh, I'm not Black first, I'm Muslim first." What, as if there's something wrong with your Blackness informing your Islam and like vice versa, as if these things aren't constantly in conversation with each other. So a lot of that is very frustrating for me because so much meaningful, impactful work happens at the intersections, happens at where these things cross, at the crossroads. And people not willing to dive into that or telling you to step out of that, I feel like it does us all a disservice. And I think it's also a very Western and like masculine coded way of talking about information. This idea that like, oh, I need certain like empirical data and evidence, or think especially when we're talking about like Islam, when men talk about Islam, it's seen as the truth. When women talk about our experiences, it's we're being biased. The fact
Mm-hmm.
is, everyone is biased. The difference is a certain group, their biases have the power to impact our lived experiences, and they're interpreting certain things in the text, in the tradition, with only their experience at the forefront. And so, how would they possibly understand anyone else's experience, anybody else's identity politics, without consulting them? So there is always identity politics being at play, but whose identity is it? Like I was posting on my stories today, like we can't forget that we're literally living in the realities of deranged white men. Like that is we're in this is we're constantly in conversation with their beliefs, with their thoughts, with their feelings. But then when
Ugh.
us on the return finally have a little bit of a space or a platform to talk about how we know things, how we interpret things, how we see the world, then suddenly it's like, oh no, that's not, oh, you're biased. Oh, it's your identity politics. Oh, you just, why do we always have to talk about you being Black? Why do we always have to talk about, certain things that you went through? Just read the text. There's nothing to interpret. Just look at it. It does us all a disservice. And it's specifically from an Islamic standpoint, as someone that always is focusing on like Islamic history, it's so antithetical to what like the Muslim intellectual tradition has been historically. Like the way that people, not only were these scholars like always in debates with each other, but the vast array of beliefs and interpretations of the tradition were always accepted and in conversation with each other. The idea that, like, something my imam says often is that Islam looks different in every part of the world that it's in. And I personally like to think about Islam as a religion that lives inside a cultural context. There is no separating really one from another, which is why you go to different places around the world and it looks very different. So how do we, especially here in the West, where we're more melting pot, it's a whole bunch of us, right? We're all coming from different identities and traditions and frameworks. How are we in conversation with each other? Or how do we better that conversation? I think it's only by talking about those intersections that we do that. But no one wants to do. There's this desire for hegemony that I don't understand.
Oh
Because
my
that's
gosh.
that's never been our thing. Like that's never been, from an Islamic standpoint, I think from a Black standpoint, that's never been how the world works. But suddenly we all have to fit into these cookie cutter ways of interpreting big things. We're talking about like your identity, your liveness, your lived experiences, your faith, your spirituality. That has to be packaged in a neat little box. And anything outside of that is, girl, we don't have time for it. It's frustrating.
So frustrating. What religious studies agrees on, what Black studies agrees on, what decolonial studies agrees on, and all those intersection is the moment that you start speaking in universals, you are speaking in the language of white supremacy. So like
Always.
this desire for hegemony, and like I mean, when you just think about the Islamic theological and philosophical tradition, let's be very for real, the text contradicts itself, right? There are passages in the Quran that contradict themselves. There are certain cases within Islamic law and jurisprudence. There are Islamic theologians and philosophers who are debating each other about fundamental things. This idea that it's only ever been one thing, there's only ever been one interpretation. This desire for hegemony, where does it come from? We have to understand that this desire for things to be exactly one way and only one way is actually literally the ideological root of white supremacy. For you to claim a universalism and then claim what everyone else is doing as a form of identity politics, you're trying to de-intellectualize me and what I'm doing when you don't realize that you're actually de-intellectualizing yourself as well.
Yes, and
So,
our tradition as well. I think a lot of the time, specifically when we're talking about like Islam, Muslims as, you know, as marginalized people, there's a sense of like assimilating that we all have to do to some capacity in the West. And I think that flattening of Islam is also a way to make Islam more legible for like the white gaze. And like, girl, who cares? You know what I mean?
right,
Like, who can, like, Muslims can pray next to each other every day, and we all pray differently just based off of the four madhabs alone.
right,
Like, we all pray differently. We all make wudu differently. Girl, who cares what white people do or don't understand about what we're doing?
right. Who benefits from coherence? Like,
Right.
since when is the human mind not capable of dealing with a lot of different things all at once
Yeah.
in contradiction? We're like, isn't it literally like a beautiful thing of our intellect that we can comprehend contradiction?
Yeah, we can hold these things
Right.
at the same time. We can hold the nuance. Like I think about
That's a better
this
word for it. Nuance, not
yeah,
contradiction.
I
Yeah.
think about this hadith about how like somebody was asking the Prophet for something, advice. This young guy, he was asking for advice about like fasting. Should he fast? And the Prophet told him no. An older guy asked him about if he should fast, and he said yes. And when people came and asked the Prophet like why did he make those different rulings, once again, their lived context, like interpreted it came into the foreplay of how he disseminated information and rulings to them. He was to the young guy, you just got married. You can't fast. Let's be for real. That's not within your capacity right now. So the old guy, you old head, you've been married for some time, you got it. You have a bit more discipline. You lived this life before, but and that nuance, that contradiction all live together. That doesn't make one ruling better or less than the other. It was like they lived simultaneously with each other, in conjunction with each other. And something that I love that like you're always saying is that like we ourselves are able to discern religion for ourselves, and like something that our point of view is important in how we interpret, our faith and our traditions. And I think to me that also goes along with the importance of free will. If you were supposed to just be this like mindless like robot in regards to how you practice or approach anything, then what would be the point of your free will, right? Like, of course we all are interpreting things in very different spaces and capacities, because we have not only the choice to do so but also the differences to do so, right? I always think about how in the Quran it's emphasized that there was a messenger sent to each nation. And when I think about that, it to me in a really endearing way, I think this is God explaining to us that identity politics, representation is important. People want to be seen on a very deep spiritual level. It's imperative that if I'm disseminating information, that it's coming from people that look like a certain type of people, that look like the people that are delivering it, that speak their language. So why, if it was important in the text, why would it not be important in our lives realities? Why wouldn't our individual context be important for even just how we relate and talk to each other? Girl,
I
it's
mean,
frustrating.
it's almost as if Islam is supposed to be interpreted through lived experience. I mean, my
Who would have thought?
who would have thought? Who would have thought? As you have shown us at this moment, right, girl, your intellectualism, it is moving fast, and you are doing a lot. You
Yeah.
are doing a lot. Also, on the sidebar, we have to have a conversation. You're talking about potential dissertation topics. We have to have a conversation about you in grad school, like
We do.
a
We do.
1,000%. So we're gonna just sidebar that because I'm invested. But you wrote this beautiful piece called "The Dying Star,"
Yes.
and you are doing a lot. We're at the end of the semester, And everyone should go read this on your Substack. And it is about burnout. And I just want to read
Yeah.
this absolutely gorgeous. First off, your writing impeccable. And
Thank you.
you talk about this. I just want to read this for everyone. And I'll just read the whole paragraph because it's so amazing. Even though I normally don't like to do that, but here it goes. So you say, the sun is the center of our solar system. It shines and illuminates all around it. Its warmth and audacity are intoxicating. Everything in creation is drawn to it. Even the plants and trees reach for the sky, every vine and leaf and branch contorting itself just for an inch of sunlight, hungry to bask in its rays. Without its consistent presence, whole flocks of species go into hibernation, forced into prolonged darkness due to the weight of its absence. Such is the power of the sun. But after all that shining, all that work of breathing life into this floating rock and its ungrateful inhabitants, even the sun needs rest. The moon, in all its whimsy, clocks in every night, standing guard as its twin descends. So if even the sun demands its rest, obligations be damned, then why can't I? Why do I find it so hard to set boundaries as strict and precise as dawn and dusk? Sis, talk to me about this. What inspired this? What do you want us to know from this piece? Like, I just, my God, like you were just speaking to my soul.
That's actually literally that's my favorite. Yeah, I think that's like one of my favorite passages that I wrote. So this was something that I had kind of started as like a journaling thing. It was like certain things that I was experiencing. It was one of like I think it was a free write moment. I was a few years ago. At this point, it's not like 2 years ago. I had a very dramatic friend breakup.
The worst.
The
Friend
worst.
breakups are the worst.
And even worse because like being a creator, being somebody with a public platform, some of that trickled online. And yeah, and it was also simultaneously wrapped up in it was like boy stuff, me having a crush on a guy that was in the friend group. It all got super messy. And so at that point, I'm sitting with not only the loss of like a potential like love interest, but the loss of like friends and loss of like a community. And that was just jarring for me to experience. And then also I like had lost my grandfather in the midst of this. This was, I think, at this point, not this Ramadan that just passed, but like Ramadan of 2025. And I was just feeling so overwhelmed, but in a way that like the words were just like pouring out of me. And I'm not someone that gets that very often with my writing. I think I used other methods sometimes to like process my experiences. I'll like yell and rant or like I'll do like audio journaling. But that day I just felt called to write. And I'm a very like woo whimsy spiritual type of girl. I like to make the joke that I'm Sufi on the weekends. So
I'm gonna start
I
saying that.
I take it really seriously when Allah is asking us to look at the stars and the moon and the earth around us as proof of something, as saying something, but also, you know, the idea that like the celestial bodies and the earth and the trees and everything will also speak on the day of judgment, that they also are worshiping Allah, right? So I'm thinking about myself in tandem with the universe. And often that's usually like my standpoint. And I felt like the sun because of just like the burning, like burning and shining at the same time was what I felt I was experiencing. Like when I'm outside or when I'm with people, I'm on, right? Like I'm giving you all of this like light and care and nurture and like, you know, like I love the moon. The moon is great, but the sun is the big dog in the sky. You know what I mean? Like the sun is really what keeps us, our atmosphere, the plants, all of it, like, you know, all of that is the sun. So I felt that shine, but also that burden, that responsibility. And specifically what I was going through with that friend group is it felt like they liked when I was um the older sister kind of energy, which I am an eldest daughter. They like that protective, that fierceness, right? Once again, like about the sun, the burning, the harshness of its rays in defense of them. It was something that was accepted. But the minute that it was for my own sake, right? When those rays, I guess, were pointed at them, when I had to like protect myself, it was this complete flip in how I was treated. And it was interesting to me because I felt like so much of Black women's experience of love and care, unfortunately, even from our familial homes and our community, are tied to labor. And it was interesting to see how my dynamics with people changed when I wasn't performing labor for them. And like that line about, the moon clocking in. And there's another part where I talk about how, if I could talk to the sun, I would ask, is it jealous of the moon because it has the easier shift? Right. But the moon, yeah, you're pulling the waves. Okay, Katara. But this, it's really the sun doing all of that like heavy lifting. And it is always Black women doing the heavy lifting of not only our interpersonal relationships, our community, also like at the forefront of every political movement, our women, our femmes, our Black, brown, indigenous women, like that is the weight that we are carrying, but also our impact on society is very much like that. I don't know if you've seen people talking about how there's like this complaint that we're losing recipes and traditions. And someone was like, yeah, that's because women aren't tied to the kitchen anymore. Right? Like
Right.
it was almost solely our responsibility to carry all of these cultural traditions and
Right.
rituals. We were doing that. We are cultivating community ties. We're passing down the recipes. All of that weight is killer. And that's another part of the piece a little bit later is me honestly like playing around with ideas of like suicidality and like as the and death in general as the end result of burnout, right? Like how
Mm-hmm.
the stress that
Mm-hmm.
Black women endure, and honestly, a lot of women experience this, a lot of women in femmes experience this, how it shows up in autoimmune diseases, all of these things that are impacting so many of us, the PCOS, the hypertension, all of
Named
that.
a few conditions I struggle with myself right there.
Hello, say. So it's a part of that, like this play with these play of words about burnout and about stars and burning and dying. And it's, well, no, yeah, some of us might actually and are actually actively dying from the weight of these things that we're holding. And so I'm like, girl, but every day the sun, she do her big one and then she's out of there. And it's funny that I use the sun in like a feminine way because the sun is always read as masculine. And even that is, I guess, like an ode to myself of always feeling I was a star, but not just a star. Whatever these random names for these stars that they got going on. Like I mentioned, I took an astronomy 101 class, barely paid attention. They got all types of names for the stars, but I'm like, no, like this, the biggest, the sun, the sun. That is, it's and to me, it represents my feminine experience. It represents the feminine experience that I see from so many people around me. And I just wanted to put it to words. I wanted to make it real and legible, that I wasn't like crazy for feeling all these things at the same time. People are like, how can you be so, people were reading me as very extroverted. People were reading me as like very like larger than life, which is very real. But then also simultaneously, once again, the shining and the burning. When I'm alone, I'm feeling the weight of that on my own. Like I'm carrying that. And how do I do this? And for a while, the piece wasn't finished. Like I had it for like a year in pieces. I actually only finished it a few weeks ago because I was talking to a friend about it. And they were like, why didn't you publish this? And I'm like, it's not done. And they were like, it sounds like you have more to say then. And I went back and I edited some stuff. I moved some stuff around in that time. I had lost like another family member. And it was just me wanting to really publish this and speak to that grief, to name it. The burnout is also a form of grieving in a lot of ways. And the ending was like, is the newest part of the piece because I didn't know how I wanted it to end. I think at the time when I started it, the ending was ambiguous. I didn't know how that would end. But I think I ended it with something along the lines of like, how stars change and they die and they are reborn. And I think, I will too. And all of us will, dying hopefully not in a permanent sense for all of us, but in a changing way, like a butterfly, like the stars, that type
Absolutely.
of, the sun descending and ending on certain things and then you rising a different version of yourself is something that I'm trying to claim. I think kind of like back to the top of this interview talking about the seasons, I'm trying to claim that rebirth. I'm trying to claim that blooming, that shining, the sun is really about to do her big one when the summer comes. And so I'm just trying to like step into that and claim that. And yeah, so I'm very happy that you liked the piece. It was crazy that I posted it and you wanted to talk about it because I was like, I had actually posted it during Ramadan, but didn't even promote it. Like I
I
snuck
noticed that.
it.
I noticed that it was
Yeah.
backdated to February, but I don't know much about Substack. So I was like, oh, maybe she like didn't have it public, but I
Oh
saw the
no, she was
backdate.
there. I literally randomly, and I was like, I just gotta get it out. I just gotta post. I have to post. It was like literally. Oh, at this point, a year and a half, it was sitting in there,
Yeah.
and I posted it, and I finally was. I should tell people that I wrote this.
And I'm so grateful that you did, because I think one of the most beautiful things that that piece did for me is like, wow, what I'm experiencing so intensely individually is actually the intensity of it is intensifying because this is a collective feeling amongst
Yes.
people who look like me, amongst my ancestors. This is deep, this is generational, this is ancestral, this is,
Yeah.
this burnout is more than just my own,
Yeah. You're
in my
carrying
own
all of that.
feeling. Yeah. And so I just, one thing that we like to do, one thing that I'm like that we like to do, and it's so funny. Somebody was like, "Who's the we that you refer to when you talk about the podcast?" I was like, "Oh, me, myself, and I." Sorry, I'm like, it's like me,
Hello,
but now
royal
it's
we.
we.
Thank you.
Like, right, exactly. But
It
one
is
thing,
we.
I like to do, and what I think the piece is so amazing is that, I like to close out on where I'm finding grounding, and I am finding grounding in this beautiful piece that you wrote, in the kind of honesty and like unflinching like vulnerability about talking about how things can get dark too when things are burning out and you feel burnt out. And so, but just the fact that you wrote about this in such a transparent, vulnerable way, I'm finding a lot of grounding to actually be transparent and vulnerable myself. Like the episode that's going to come out before this one is on how I've been feeling like very tired, and because of that tiredness, feeling very spiritually understimulated. So I'm
Mm.
actually now after having this conversation with you, I'm like, wait, I found this so grounding. Like I love, I have just loved learning from you. So I just wanted to invite you to ask you where you're finding grounding after this conversation.
Ooh. Honestly, this was really great because it was very affirming for me. I think, like I mentioned, I'm someone that kind of like lives in my head. And, in this, you were kind of mentioning Lithers earlier about this, like, the pull yourself up by your bootstraps and like self first type of thing. That unfortunately that rhetoric is very strong with amongst Black women. And it also breeds this idea of like a lot of competition. But for
Oh,
me, the reflection of myself in other Black women and Black femmes have only ever been affirming and beautiful. It's actually been it's balanced out all of the other perceptions that I feel like have been put onto me, whether it's like societally, culturally, communally, like it is truly looking and being amongst Black women and femmes. And I'm like, oh, not only do you see me, but I can trust your vision of me in a way that sometimes I can't even trust my vision of myself. So that's very grounding. I'm like, oh, like you're speaking about me, and it is the things that I have always hoped that I was. And so I'm like, oh, okay. So that I must be, you know.
absolutely, girl. You are a star. Let me just keep affirming this for you. So where can folks find you? Where should they follow? Let us know.
You can find me everywhere on the internet at Sincerely Tahiri. I am on Substack, YouTube. YouTube, I'm coming back. I promise. Te lo juro, I will be back. Instagram and TikTok. Yeah, find me everywhere. You can also, if you're in New York, you'll find me outside. You
Love that.
can
Love that.
find
We
me
got to talk
outside.
too, because I'm also going to be in New York this summer. But I know, doing research. But for all of you, if you loved this episode, please, please follow Tahira. Give her all the follows, and share this episode with a friend. Follow us I'm on Instagram, on YouTube, and TikTok. If you search Iman ABDK, IMAN ABDK. And the best thing you can do is both give us all a follow, but also share this with someone that you think is going to find grounding in this conversation. So we will see you all here next Monday. And thank you so much for joining us, Tahira.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, bye bye.
Bye.